What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Touchline Talk Show. We actually have a Champions League group stage to preview. That is the whole emphasis of putting this show on Wednesday nights, after all, is to get quick turnaround from Champions League games. Of course, we haven't been able to do that in months because of the fact there was no Champions League. Today is the day we get to actually preview the group stage and set the scene for the beginning of the Champions League next week. But before we do that, there was also plenty of midweek action to get to, specifically in the Premier League. So that is what we are going to do to start the show. Your most potentially high profile, certainly most dramatic game midweek wise in the Premier League. Liverpool escape with a 2-1 win over Newcastle. Alexander Isak finally gets cleared to play, and Newcastle is without basically their front three. Not exactly, because I don't really consider Bruno Guimaraes part of a front three, but Callum Wilson, Bruno Guimaraes, Alan St. Maximin, all unavailable for this game. So Alexander Isak comes in at the perfect time, scores a goal, has another one where he's inches offside, and all of a sudden Newcastle are leading at Anfield. And I was ready to give my speech about Eddie Howe, and it didn't exactly happen that way, primarily because though Newcastle had the lead, they were never really able to get control of the game. Liverpool weren't creating all that much. It's not like Liverpool were playing well in attack in the first half. But it was never sort of tilted dramatically in Newcastle's favor. It was a lot of counterattacks and sort of capitalizing on some mistakes from Liverpool. And so whenever you can't really sort of elevate to that next level and really assume control of a game, it's Liverpool playing at Anfield, and they became more and more dominant as the game went on. Not necessarily from a possession standpoint. They always controlled possession and had a large advantage there. But from a balance of play perspective, they really started taking control. Again, not a great Liverpool performance, but they never were really shaken by that Newcastle goal. It didn't necessarily come out of nothing, but it also wasn't sort of deserved, and you felt like it was coming for 15 minutes before they finally scored. So Liverpool were able to recover, didn't faze them too much, and just sort of kept pushing. Roberto Firmino gets the first one. Phenomenal stretch of 4 or 5 days for him, getting his 100th Liverpool goal, and then getting a huge one here. An odd chance here or there after that. It wasn't the inevitable goal that sometimes you feel with Liverpool, where they're just knocking on the door and you know it's coming. But all of a sudden they get one final corner kick, and Fabio Carvalho, who also had himself a week, finds a way to put it in the back of the net, and Liverpool get this 2-1 win. Probably deserved on the balance of play, but that was a good Newcastle performance, especially considering who wasn't on the field. Eddie Howe has to be pleased with what he saw, even though they threw away 3 points. But this is really, I want to focus on the Liverpool part of this. There are two main reasons for me why this was a massive, massive win, and a massive difference between settling for a draw and Carvalho getting them the win. First, just from a confidence standpoint, this team has a tendency, and all we can really go back to is the other season where they had all of these injuries and lost that stretch of games at Anfield. That's really the only reference point we have for Liverpool struggling. And it just kind of never stopped. Every time you thought there's no way they're going to lose again, they're going to have to find a way to win this one, surely, they just kept losing, kept dropping points. So to get sort of back on track here, to follow up what they did against Bournemouth with another win, you feel like they're sort of back on track and operating at a higher level. It's nowhere near 100%. Their squad is nowhere near 100%. But to build on that 9-0 with another win, huge. And the other part of this is very simply to avoid dropping more points. You can't bury yourself too deep a hole to dig out of, especially with a team that has some of these issues that we're continuing to see from Liverpool. I'm not going to spend time on that here. I've addressed it before. It's the same issues and the way that it's kind of a snowball effect when the midfield isn't doing what the midfield needs to, which happens when you don't have the midfielders available that Jurgen Klopp would want, which is the case until all of these guys get healthy. And you have Darwin Nunez, who's now set to come back. Diogo Jota is going to be back. It's going to be a different conversation. So just getting another 3 points on the board as you're sort of starting to regroup and get closer to full strength, big deal. And the other part of this for me is watching this game reinforced my belief. There are two teams and then there are everybody else. And those two teams are Arsenal and Manchester City. I mean, I'm not going to talk about Manchester City in this section. I'll mention a little bit when we get to Champions League. Erling Haaland is doing basically what I thought. Just this idea that it was going to be difficult for him to fit into this system, I never bought into and quite frankly found somewhat laughable. But Arsenal, again, go ahead, give up an Olympico and come right back to take the lead, see out the game, and continue their perfect record. I'm not saying Arsenal is actually going to give City a title chase from start to finish. I'm not there yet. But the more I see Liverpool struggle through some of these games, now of course they didn't struggle against Bournemouth, but against the better opposition, and have these days where the offense just isn't clicking, this reinforced what I had already said, which is Liverpool, it's a battle for the top four and making sure you get a Champions League spot. I don't see them getting back into this title race. It's the reality of the situation. It's how good City is. That's how good Arsenal has been, and the hole they now have to climb out of. But they get the 3 points. Huge, huge win, both for confidence and to just keep themselves within striking distance until they can get healthy. The other team in that top three conversation for me so far this season has been Tottenham, who have to settle for a draw with West Ham. Another game where Spurs had a horrible half where they looked non-existent, except for this time, instead of the first half, it was the second half. So they go ahead, get the own goal, and then West Ham really come on after halftime, get the equalizer, absolutely deserved, and nearly win it at the very end. And there are sort of two different ways I want to break this down. First, on the Tottenham side, this team is really struggling to impose themselves on games and dominate proceedings and control what is happening. And that is incredibly concerning to me. I will continue to hold to my belief that the only way you're going after Manchester City and the only way you're going to contend for a title in this league right now, with how good these teams are, is if you can go impose your will on people and you are not reliant on counterattacks, you're not reliant on mistakes from other teams, you can sit there and break down a low block and you can win when the other team is playing for a draw. And that is something, not that West Ham were playing for a draw in this game. That's completely unfair to West Ham. But you see where I'm going with this. Spurs have these halves where they have one in the first half against Chelsea, first half against Wolves. You can go down the list, and they have found a way to win some of those games. But you can't rely on being able to do it in 45 minutes every single week. And it all goes to the main point in my belief about sort of evaluating title contenders is you have to play for 3 points every single week. Draws are disappointing results. I don't care the circumstances. I don't care where the game is played. That's the bar Manchester City and the really good Liverpool teams have set. You are playing for 3 points every week or you're not contending for the title. And when you just aren't a factor in the game for half of it, and the other team feels pretty comfortable, West Ham is certainly good enough to go do what they did in the second half when Spurs can't hold control of the game. So this is getting concerning for me. I'm really high on this Tottenham team. I'm buying into the hype, and I'm quite honestly starting to regret it a little bit. It's still early. We'll see how things progress from here, but this is becoming a pattern, and it is an incredibly concerning one. On the West Ham side of things, taking 4 points from these last two games, getting your first win of the season, getting a point against Spurs, does wonders for sort of the vibes within the club and the fan base. It's a difficult schedule to start. You have the Nottingham Forest game, which just didn't go your way. That's when you should have 3 points. You didn't get anything out of it. That happens. But it was combined with having to play Manchester City, Brighton beating you. Now you got to play Spurs. Just sort of a lot of unfortunate series of events have occurred here for West Ham at the beginning of the season. But they find a way to get out of it. They're not in the relegation zone. They were going to be fine anyway, but you don't have to worry about that part of it. You got some points on the board. You got to win. This was a pretty good performance, especially in the second half. So now I'm starting to believe, again, this team can recover from this somewhat slow start and get themselves back into European contention. Because I really was starting to doubt that when City doesn't go great, then the Nottingham Forest game happens, then the Brighton game happens, and you're just kind of looking around wondering where they're going to get these points from. Well, they've started to turn things around. They're playing better. So, definitely from a moral victory confidence standpoint, West Ham get the edge in this one. Spurs have to view every single point they drop as incredibly disappointing if they're going to try to stay with Manchester City and potentially Arsenal if they can keep this up. But points are split at the end of the day there. And then one game to touch on from Tuesday. Chelsea lose to Southampton. There have been some pretty poor Chelsea performances here recently. And it's just bizarre that they, in between what happened against Leeds and this game, they go down a man in the first half, and yet somehow in the second half play really well for 30 or so minutes. Raheem Sterling scores twice, so their win came 10-11. But when they're playing 11-11, they're getting destroyed by Leeds, and now Southampton are beating them. Raheem Sterling scored again in this game. That's his third in 2 games. And they were losing by halftime after taking the lead. Now, yes, it should be acknowledged this was a very depleted squad. Defensively, and particularly in the midfield, there are a lot of players missing. Jurgen Klopp doesn't want to hear that excuse. To a certain extent, Pep Guardiola also doesn't want to hear it. It happens sometimes. The other big teams have to deal with this too. There was plenty of talent on the field. Which gets into the point I want to make here and the really concerning part of this, and why, from the beginning, I was skeptical that this Chelsea team could actually finish in the top 4. And so far, I would argue I've been justified in my concern. Not only are they struggling to put the ball in the net outside of Raheem Sterling, and generally I would still argue they are struggling to convert the chances they should. But Mason Mount and Kai Havertz cannot both be out of form and playing poorly at the same time. Neither of them have a goal involvement. We're 5 games into the season at this point. Raheem Sterling cannot carry this offense on his own. And until Raheem Sterling started scoring, it was, Reece James and Kalidou Koulibaly carrying the offense. That is not going to work. And now that Raheem Sterling is playing well and taking some of these chances and sort of creating them out of nothing like he did against Leicester, the bigger concern here is not what's going to happen at the number 9, whether you want to consider Sterling a number 9 or not. The bigger concern is the 2 players behind him. Kai Havertz didn't convert his chances last season. It was one of my big concerns coming into this season. He fell into that broader group and that theme I've stressed over and over again. But Mason Mount was excellent last season. I will argue maybe Antonio Rudiger, but I would argue Mason Mount was their most important player. When you take Mason Mount's contributions out and you're getting the same Kai Havertz, except he's not even scoring every once in a while, you've got a major problem. And I am by no means a Christian Pulisic apologist who believes he should be starting every week. I've said this before when I was talking about him potentially leaving. When you're at this size of a club and you're not a, worldwide recognized elite player, those 3, 4, 5 guys on these kind of teams, there is no such thing as a guaranteed starting spot. Your form's going to dip in and out. You're going to score. You're going to get a couple games after that. You're going to pick up an injury. You're going to have to work your way back into the lineup. It's just going to be an up and down reality. Ask any Manchester City player. Ask plenty of the guys at Chelsea. You can go down the list. But what is Thomas Tuchel waiting for? And nobody better be expecting Christian Pulisic or Hakim Ziyech or whoever you want to throw in there to be at their best, playing inconsistent minutes, coming on for 15, 20 minutes at the end of a game, being thrown into something they had no ability to establish a rhythm in. And I'm going to Pulisic specifically because Ziyech is a very different kind of player. Pulisic falls into more of the Mason Mount, Kai Havertz conversation and sort of style of player. And yes, I know the injuries, and he is inconsistent. But from a minute-by-minute standpoint, he has proven to be more productive than at least Kai Havertz. And this season, Mason Mount as well. I would argue last year Mason Mount was undroppable. That's how impressed I was by what he did. But at some point, this becomes on Thomas Tuchel. Either you got to find a way to fix this and get those two guys playing much better and actually contributing to your offense, or you got to pull at least one of them from the starting lineup. You are running, much like Liverpool, you are running out of time here. Spurs aren't going anywhere. Arsenal's not going anywhere. City's not going anywhere. And I still have more confidence in Liverpool than I do Chelsea at this point. It is amazing to me how difficult it is for this team to score goals. And then there's also the defensive side of this. Tuchel has been very clear through their actions and the players they've been linked with. He is not happy with the center back situation, understandably so. These are the kind of things that occur when you lose to starter/borderline starters, regular contributors. When you're not able to do anything because the club's assets are frozen. And I was all in on the Kalidou Koulibaly signing. Didn't expect him to be the player he was 3-4 years ago. But it's not like he's 35. And it just hasn't gone particularly well yet. Which is where I've gotten to the point where they needed to spend that money on Wesley Fofana. For now, and to replenish this center back group moving forward. Because when you're looking at it at this moment in time, you have maybe Trevor Chalobah, but I don't think he's part of the long-term future, at least as a guaranteed part of the future. So you're looking at 0 center backs you know you are moving forward with 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Koulibaly will be there for a little while, but he's not sort of the next era of Chelsea. That's just not the stage he's at in his career. So you get Wesley Fofana, who is more than capable of stepping in right now and playing in the Champions League. He is that good. And this is also sort of your defensive building block moving forward. It was a rather ugly situation, but they got it across the line. And I don't think they should be apologizing one bit for spending all of that money on him. This is not Harry Maguire 2.0. Right? The last time Leicester sold a center back at this kind of price, it was Harry Maguire. And Harry Maguire was simply not the player Manchester United thought they were playing for the season before he got sold. Wesley Fofana is every bit the player Chelsea are buying. So I'm on board with this, all for it. It's going to help. It just doesn't matter all that much if, A, he can't stay on the field because he's had injury problems, but B, if they can't figure out what's going on the other part of the field in the attacking third. Finally, wanted to address our first managerial departure of the Premier League season. It took less than a month, 4 games. It's Scott Parker at Bournemouth. First, I would like to point out, as Bournemouth picked up another point today, they are still on pace for 30, having already played Liverpool and Arsenal. Now, 30 probably doesn't keep you safe, but you're right there in the ballpark. This is not a reaction to a 9-0 defeat and saying we are really worried that if we don't make a change, we're going to get relegated. To their credit, Bournemouth aren't pretending that's the situation, and you just can't draw that kind of conclusion, A, based on what they've done so far, and B, this early in the season. What this appears to be, more than anything else, is a result of Scott Parker essentially throwing his team under the bus week after week, and in doing so, also criticizing the board by throwing them under the bus in the sense of, I don't know what we're supposed to do. We don't have the talent we need. More or less, you can go read the exact quotes. They're rather shocking. But consistently, that's been his message in the media, is we don't have what we need. So there are 2 different parts of this. Because like most things in sports, there's a gray area and there's nuance to it. Scott Parker should not be going out there week after week complaining about his roster. It does nothing to help the situation, and all it does is make his players feel like he doesn't care about them, he doesn't think they're good, he doesn't value them, and none of that's going to help, especially when you know you are already going to be in a relegation fight. Nobody out there was thinking Bournemouth was going to walk in here and comfortably finish 13th. The other side, you're coming in as Bournemouth, and the only team that's done less, if I have the numbers correct, I think I saw this stat, the only team that has done less in the transfer window is Leicester. And that could very well change by the time this transfer window is actually over. But B, that's because, as of this taping, they haven't spent any money on an actual player. It was a free transfer, the one player they've brought in. So the bar is incredibly low there. And Leicester have all kinds of players other teams want. Bournemouth are trying to take a team from the Championship that didn't even win the Championship and elevate them to the Premier League. I don't care how many Premier League quality players you think you have. If you are the board and sort of the talent evaluating squad building people at Bournemouth, you have no right to go out there and assume Scott Parker can turn this thing into a team that can achieve safety without backing him financially. And all of this comes as a result of the big question I have, which is, and if you're a Bournemouth fan, this is where you should be really concerned. Why were people not on the same page after you got promoted? This is the first thing you have to do after you get promotion and you know you're going to the Premier League, is sit down, look at the financial situation, and get on the same page about how much money you're going to have to spend, what you're going to try and emphasize, how much help your manager feels like they need, and put a plan together that hopefully everybody can agree on. And if not, you make the managerial change then. Instead, you get into a situation where it seems things kind of go sour relationally with Scott Parker and players when the mood and the vibe and the culture isn't right. So this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Bournemouth should know that and should make sure it didn't happen again. But here we are 3-4 weeks into the Premier League season, and it's kind of turned into a train wreck. In terms of the actual decision, if Bournemouth feel like Scott Parker had lost the locker room and that this was not going to get rectified, and he was just going to keep denigrating his players every week in the media, 100% justified in making the change. That's one of my things, is if you lose the locker room, 9 times out of 10, the right decision is to fire the manager. And I am not somebody who likes changing coaches. But there also has to be an acknowledgement of the role Bournemouth played in creating this situation. This is not just Scott Parker being sour and difficult to work with. You have got to communicate and get on the same page and figure out what is going to happen and have those hard conversations if you're not going to be able to provide Scott Parker with what he wants. And acknowledge you are not giving him the tools he needs to be successful and asking him to do a really difficult job. That didn't happen. Scott Parker was not willing, capable, whatever it might have been, to sort of take the heat for it. And so here we are, and we already have a new manager, or at least a managerial change. We'll see who ends up taking this job permanently and how they handle this the rest of the season. But managerial change in the Premier League, and we're still in the month of August. Okay. That's all we've got for midweek Premier League action. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, as promised, Champions League preview. We're going to look at every single group, biggest storylines, what to expect, how these teams have done so far, and get into it to set the stage for next week. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. We are going to jump right into this Champions League group stage preview, starting with Group A, Ajax, Liverpool, Napoli, Rangers. Ajax, still perfect in the Eredivisie, not the most impressive performances in the world outside of one or two. There's been some one-goal wins in there. But it's also a league that probably doesn't get enough credit in terms of the difficulty week to week. Ajax doesn't run away with this thing and lose, one game and drop 4 points in a season. They take some lumps. PSV is, right there. But so far, so good for Ajax. And don't forget how good Ajax were in the group stage of the Champions League last season. I think it's easy to gloss over this because they just got unlucky in the round of 16. And so they kind of exited the conversation quickly. That team was in a position to make a run at another semifinal And at that point, who knows what happens? That team was on the same level as the team that nearly beat Tottenham and got to the Champions League final. This version lost an incredible amount. Sebastian Haller, Antony, Ryan Gravenberch, you go down the list. So that's the one thing I'm really curious. The big question for me about Ajax heading into this Champions League group stage is how close can they get to the team last season? Because to me, the team last season gets out of this group. And maybe even does so pretty comfortably. This group, I'm not so sure. Napoli have looked awfully good going forward. And again, a team that has lost a lot and really sort of rebuilt. I'm still not convinced their ceiling is all that high, which is why I still think Ajax have a really, really good chance of getting out of this group. But if, for whatever reason, Ajax struggle a little bit, Napoli is scoring goals for fun, more or less, in Serie A. So this is very much three teams. To me, this is the second best trio of teams in a group. And they're not number one, and there's a clear gap between number three. They are just number two with a cushion on both sides, which is where Rangers got really, really unlucky. This is the team that just got past PSV, who are hanging in there with Ajax. And they did drop points in the Scottish Premiership. They drew Hibs. John Lundstrom, red card. They were winning, ended up giving an equalizer. It's a draw, not the end of the world. Couldn't be the difference between winning and losing the league. But from how they are playing and what it means for the Champions League standpoint, not putting too much stock into that. In another world, I really like Rangers' chances of at least getting into the Europa League and making a real run at getting into the knockout stage. But I look at this group and I could see potentially, if things go well, Europa League. Right? This is a team that just went to the final of the Europa League, beat some pretty impressive teams to get there. This is a very, 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 very good Rangers team who got an incredibly unfortunate draw. And then the final team in here, of course, is Liverpool. I just talked about some of the concerns. Not going to go more in depth and keep belaboring the point about Liverpool. Cover them plenty in other parts of this show. The one thing I want to say, though, is when they had those disappointing Champions League showings, it's not the group stage. Maybe it's a poor game here or there. But the Atletico Madrid situation, Real Madrid, and that disappointing performance in the Champions League final, right? They are not a team that has a difficult time getting out of the group stage. It hasn't been great so far. They certainly are vulnerable, especially at the beginning here before they get everybody healthy. And the depth in the injuries is always going to be a question. I will believe two of these teams finish ahead of Liverpool when it actually happens. Group B. Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Club Brugge, Porto. This is perhaps the most wide open group. Atletico Madrid are certainly your favorites. They've been up and down so far. Bad performance in their loss against Villarreal. There's been some frustration on the transfer front. It's kind of an odd group of players right now. That has also been the case in the past, where I don't view them as legit La Liga title contenders. But like clockwork, they show up and make your life incredibly difficult in the Champions League. And they have the benefit of a very favorable group, so I fully expect them to top it and at the very least go through. Porto have struggled on the road, already lost in their league. This is a team I was high on and still, quite honestly, really like their setup here in terms of potentially getting to the knockout stage. But they haven't exactly been as consistent as I would like so far. Bayer Leverkusen, 1 win, 3 losses in the Bundesliga. However, the numbers paint a much brighter picture. And I do expect them to sort of turn things around. This is a very good team, one of the 4 or 5 best in Germany. I would argue 4 from a talent perspective. Again, you got to feel really good if you're Leverkusen about this draw. Especially if you can kind of put this poor start to the season behind you and start to get things rolling here. And, it could just be for those first 3 weeks of the season, just nothing could go your way. Because like I said, from an expected goal standpoint, from an analytical standpoint, it hasn't been catastrophic. They've been incredibly unlucky. So if they can just sort of turn things around, absolutely they are right there. And then you got Club Brugge, currently 3rd in the Pro League. 4 wins, a draw, a loss. Certainly the 4th team in this group. However, it is worth pointing out they got a home draw against PSG and 1 at Leipzig last season in a much more difficult group. Absolutely, I could see a world in which they beat Porto or beat Leverkusen, take a point off Atletico Madrid, and really mess things up. I still expect them to finish 4th. I feel pretty confident in that. But don't be surprised if somehow they end up determining who finishes 2nd, who finishes 3rd in this group, and makes it closer than maybe it appears it should be on paper. Then we go to Group C. This is your big 3, so to speak. Bayern, Barcelona, Inter Milan, and poor Victoria Pilsen living their best lives out here back in the Champions League. They were last in the group stage in 2018-19. You're going to have some incredible memories getting to play these teams, these players. There's just no other combination. If I'm a 4th team in a group, this is the one place I absolutely wanted to avoid. Good luck to your Victoria Pilsen. Wish you all the best. It'd be awesome if you found a way to even make the Europa League. Bayern are looking just fine. I'm not worried about what Borussia Mönchengladbach can do to them. It just seems to happen all the time, and they still run through the Bundesliga. Barcelona have really picked things up after that disappointing draw to open the season. Robert Lewandowski is scoring brilliant goals and scoring goals in the first minute of the game. They are looking like the team they were supposed to be when they spent all this money to get themselves back to a point where they could contend for the Champions League. And then your other team, of course, is Inter Milan. And perhaps the single thing I am most interested in when it comes to the Champions League this season is what Serie A teams can do. And this is the best example of it. There are a couple other ones we haven't gotten to yet who should get through their groups. It's not a guarantee, though, but they should. Going back, the last quote-unquote good run from a Serie A team in the Champions League was Atalanta when they nearly beat PSG in the single leg condensed knockout rounds after the pandemic hit. Right? It's a bunch of Juventus losing in the round of 16 to teams they shouldn't. And it's the team who wins the league the year before not even getting to the Europa League. It happened to Inter, and then it just happened to AC Milan. At some point, these teams need to show up. And now you got Lukaku back. Now he's currently injured. He's going to miss at least this first game, it sounds like. But you better show up, Inter Milan. And if you do finish 3rd, okay. Understandable. Better make a deep run in the Europa League, though. This is very much, for me, Serie A legacy time. And getting your reputation back and proving you can compete with the best teams in the world. Because, yes, Bayern has been there, except for last season, right? You got PSG, you got the Premier League teams, Real Madrid. But in a world where Barcelona's down, Bayern were down last season, there were semifinal spots for the taking. And nobody from Serie A has stepped up. And now we are in year 3 of Juventus not being the only team capable of winning this whole thing. The Milan teams are the ones really letting this league down right now when it comes to Champions League. They're in very different situations when it comes to their group. But this is go time. Inter Milan, let's see what you're made of. This is a great opportunity to restore part of Serie A's reputation by getting out of this group and maybe even topping it. At least getting out of it and making a deep run and getting to the quarterfinals, getting to the semifinals. Because I'm going to lay out the scenario here where it's another incredibly disappointing year for Serie A. They have their work cut out for them. And a big part of that is what Inter Milan does in this incredibly difficult group. Then we go to Group D, Frankfurt, Marseille, Sporting Lisbon, and Tottenham. Frankfurt are just hard to make sense of. It's just kind of been up and down. You know, Bayern ripped them to shreds at the beginning of the season. This is, of course, the team coming off of a Europa League triumph, which is how they got here, because they were nowhere near one of the best teams in Germany last season. They do only have losses to Bayern and Real Madrid this season. There are also some draws in there to mid-table Bundesliga teams. But they know how to do it in the knockout tournament. They just did it last season. So I honestly am still trying to figure out exactly what to expect from them in this group that is very, very open outside of Tottenham, who I certainly consider the favorites. It hasn't been the greatest start. Again, I just went over this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But they still look the part, kind of. I'm not going to back off of my confidence in them yet, especially in this group. Your other two teams, Sporting Lisbon, really struggling domestically, just one win in their 4 league games so far. And of the teams in this group, certainly the second most impressive, if you're talking about performances this season, is Marseille. Marseille were one of the biggest winners in Europe last season, with the turnaround they had and how far they came from, having fans invading their training ground. It was a really good season, a deep run in Europe, got back into the Champions League, and are absolutely in a position. I would argue they should be the second team coming out of this group. That is something you don't get to say in very many situations, but this draw broke favorably for them, as well as Tottenham. No excuses. This should be your group. You should top it. Those are the two teams I'm looking at. But again, Frankfurt is the wild card for me. On any given day, they can beat anybody. I could also see a world in which they finish 4th in this group. That brings us to Group E, AC Milan, Chelsea, Dynamo Zagreb, Red Bull Salzburg, excuse me. So I talked about Serie A. AC Milan, one of those teams, should go through. No excuses. There are 2 clear teams here, and then there's a clear team 3 and a clear team 4. AC Milan have struggled offensively so far, not off to a horrendous start in Serie A, but not exactly looking likely to repeat as champions either, with the points they've dropped so far. I also just laid out all of Chelsea's issues. Not going to harp on that and relive all of that either. But these are the 2 teams, of course, everybody is looking at. If you're Red Bull Salzburg, it is not a perfect group where you might actually be the second most talented team in it, which is kind of where they really benefited last season. That was a wide open group. Nobody had any clue who the best, worst, second best, third best team in that group was. It was just sort of chaos from top to bottom. Red Bull Salzburg benefited from that. Not the case here. But if you're going to be Team 3 and you're not going to get a huge break in the draw, and you're going to have to play 2 teams better than you, these 2 would be pretty high on my list. I already talked about the struggles AC Milan had last season in the Champions League and laid out all my concerns about Chelsea. Again, this is a Red Bull Salzburg team that has lost quite a bit from last season. I get that. But they've also been good so far, and I'm keeping them in my top 25 week after week because they're going to have to play in the Champions League and perform poorly to prove they don't belong there. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt based on what they did domestically last season and the fact they got into the knockout stage of the Champions League. And yes, they got obliterated in the second leg against Bayern, but they held their own in the first. It was a pretty impressive performance. Are they a top 15 team in the world? Top 16 where they should be getting out of the group? No. But I am going to keep them in that 25 range until we see how this starts playing out. Now, it's just hard to know, and that's the difficult thing about Red Bull Salzburg in particular. It's just hard to know from year to year because they sell so many players and the competition level domestically is so low. I just have no good gauge on how good this team actually is. Absolutely, I could see them getting out of this group. I could also see them finishing fourth. They are team 3 for me, and that's how I expect it to go. But I see two vulnerable favorites, quote-unquote favorites. And I'm going to give Red Bull Salzburg the benefit of the doubt and really look at them as one of sort of the dark horses to pull off an upset in terms of the teams reaching to the group stage until we actually see what they look like at this level of competition. Because like I said, you don't get what you need in Austria to get a good sense of where this team is actually at. Then Group F, Celtic, Real Madrid, Red Bull Leipzig, Shakhtar Donetsk. Real Madrid, clear favorites in this group. Don't need to elaborate on that. It's the Champions League, it's Real Madrid. The question is whether you win the whole thing or not. Red Bull Leipzig should be worried about this group. It's been a slow start. They really started to make some progress and move forward at the end of last season. I was buying what was happening. You finish with your first trophy as a Bundesliga club. And then it's just kind of back to square one and another bad start to the season. Now, Timo Werner did just come in. His return is going to help. But if I'm the other teams in pot 3, pot 4, that I know I'm going to be the quote-unquote underdogs, I am looking at Leipzig as one of the teams I would want in my group. Shakhtar have a win and a draw so far domestically. This is a team that has a track record of success in this competition and in Europe in general for years. They're difficult to play against. They can absolutely cause some problems. And again, in an open group, I'm not ruling them out. Of course, the team that I am most interested in, though, and one of the other big storylines for me in the Champions League, is these two Scottish teams. Celtic, unsurprisingly, perfect domestically. They're outscoring their opponents 21-1 so far. And where this gets really interesting is kind of the logical progression. Rangers nearly won the Europa League last season. Rangers finished behind Celtic in the league, which suggests that Celtic is the more consistent and probably more talented team. But Celtic didn't get to prove it at the highest level. Now they have that opportunity. And they happened to get the very favorable draw. Rangers got the very unfavorable one. So if you know Rangers can do what they did last season, Celtic 100% is going to be a factor in this group. I will be incredibly disappointed as a fan of this sport if Celtic sort of just go down without a fight. I expect them to finish third. But again, Leipzig is vulnerable to me. You can't ask for a much better setup if you are Celtic. There are some quote-unquote big teams I'd rather play than Real Madrid, obviously. But you're not worried about topping your group. You're worried about getting second or third, and you're in a position to have a really, really good chance of doing so in your return to the Champions League. Then we go to Group G. That is Copenhagen,